Welcome to Classroom 5.0, a podcast that uncovers industry insights, cutting-edge research, and practical evidence-based strategies that help us all to imagine and design learning environments and pathways for this ever-evolving world, so that together we can best support the next gen to uncover and deliver their unique potential. This episode has been recorded from our hometown of Port Macquarie, which we're grateful to share and enjoy alongside the traditional owners of beer pie country, whose ongoing cultures and connections to lands and waters we celebrate, and whose elders, past, present, and emerging, we pay our respect to.
I'm Marianne Power, co-founder of the Posify Group, and today I am so excited to be joined by Jeff Harry, who's here to help us all rediscover and reimagine our sense of play. And I don't know about you, but this year, play is something I am absolutely committed to getting back involved with or more involved with. Jeff combines positive psychology and play to help companies and individuals make their work more fulfilling and rediscover their joyful purpose. Through positive psychology play, he creates a safe space for teams and individuals to have those difficult conversations and address those uncomfortable challenges in a play-oriented way. In 2020, Jeff was selected by BambooHR and Engagedly as one of the top 100 HR influencers. And most recently, his work has been featured in the New York Times, Mashable, Upworthy, Shondaland, and Wired. His client playbook is off the charts and includes the likes of Google, Microsoft, Southwest Airlines, Adobe, the NFL, Amazon, and Facebook, who have all had the pleasure and the privilege of having their staff infused with more play throughout their day. He says, while we spend most of our time pretending to be important, serious grown-ups, it's when we let go of that facade and just play that the real magic happens. And Jeff, I'm so excited. I have to be really honest. I'm really excited to be seeing the magic happening with you. So welcome.
Oh, I'm so amped. Let's go. I'm ready.
Oh, awesome. And I'm going to be honest, having a look through your website, I could really riff on all of the purpose statements that you have. I think possibly, though, my favorite one would be, I'm actually going to quote you here because it's so good. One of my favorites would have to be, from creative entrepreneurs to Google staff, Jeff is giving people permission to play and own their own nerdy self. And as a self-proclaimed creative nerd, I have to say, I'm loving this one. But please, can we start, Jeff? Tell us about your own inner nerd. When do you find it's coming out and how does it love to play?
I like to start my day with play. I prime my day to actually see the day as play by starting my day either by making a ridiculous TikTok video or dancing in my house or getting on my wheelies, whatever it is, but something silly and ridiculous that reminds me, like, what will make this day the most playful day? And I think when myself that question, I find purpose.
Purpose through play. I love that. That's such a great way to start intentions. I've moved into this year really being quite, I think I've been pretty good, generally speaking, but really intentional at the top of my day. And using play to set that intention is just beautiful. And you've got so many ways to play. I must admit, I do have conversations with adults a lot who get a little bit confused about the idea of play. You mentioned wheelies and you mentioned videos. Is play always taking us back to that early childhood type of behavior, or what different types of play can we define it for our listeners today?
Yeah, so I define it in a very broad way. I define play as any joyful act where you forget about time. So it has no purpose. It has no result. You are fully in the moment. You are fully in flow. It's the thing that sometimes makes you come most alive, right? So it could be anything, right? It could be something as simple as, catching sunsets, or it could be something as complex as like making videos or writing, and the reason why I put it in such a broad sense is everyone's play is different. I once was coaching someone that was like, I don't play at all. And she was a lawyer. And I asked, well, what do you love to do? And she's like, or what do you do for work? And she's like, well, I take people that hate each other and I get them to agree on one thing. And as she started telling me more and more about it, I was like, oh, that's your play. You love doing that. So like we have to broaden what we think play is, but again, it's any joyful act where you forget about time.
I like that. And it does remind me of flow in terms of the positive psychology language. But I'm also picking up on what you're saying is that sense of more of that sense of curiosity and freedom and letting go and imagination. And am I on the right track there? Is that maybe the difference, or are they quite similar concepts?
I almost see play and flow as synonymous with each other, frankly, because what is flow? It's when you're doing something that basically where you forget about time, right? Like what is actually happening in your brain when you're in a flow state? Your brain is actually going through transient hypofrontality where the prefrontal cortex, a part of it is actually shutting down. And that part is your inner critic. So that part shuts down. And then you get this shot of dopamine and you get this wave of ideas. And you're like, oh my goodness, I could do this and I could do that and I could do this. And you start to make all these connections the same way in which you had when you were playing as a kid and you were bored and you were like, wait a minute, I'm going to make this thing. I'm going to do this thing. Like it's the same feeling. So I almost feel like they go hand in hand in many ways.
I have to say, I'm feeling a little bit nervous and excited at the same time because as you were talking, I heard dopamine, I heard lots of different directions, I heard excitement popping up, and I'm thinking, I did have a run sheet of questions, but I could ask you 57 different things. You mentioned inner critic, and I want to get there. But
Ooh.
actually, there's a real science behind this play business. This isn't just for the faint-hearted, isn't it? I love one of the lines that you have that you help to lift the veil of BS in workplaces through the power of play. And so I'm curious, given that this is actually quite a scientific topic we're also talking about, as fun as it is, what is some of that BS that you're noticing in workplaces, and how is play helping people shift away from it?
Well, so for anyone just listening, I'm wearing this Lego bow tie, right? And it's ridiculous. And I wear it to remind myself not to take myself too seriously. But think about it. Everyone is wearing a costume at work. Everyone is pretending. Everyone's pretending they know what they're talking about. Everyone's pretending they're professional. Like even the idea of like what is professional wear and what isn't. Now that a lot of us work from home, right? Like what does it mean to be professional? Like if I'm wearing like my pajama pants but I got like a suit on the top. So like we have to question a lot of the office politics, right? And a lot of the stuff that gets in the way of actual real work. I think a lot of times we're constantly pretending, and if you look at the teams that are most successful, what are they? They're playful, they're transparent, they're willing to have hard conversations, they're willing to take risks. Like, look at the organizations that thrived during the pandemic, the TikToks, the Netflixes, the Hulus. They were taking risks. They didn't know what they were doing, while all the other companies that were like, let's get back to normal, could not adapt to this new normal. And this is a huge reason. I don't know if this is happening in Australia, but this is happening in America where over 20 million people quit their job last year in 2021.
The Great Resignation.
Massive Great Resignation. And it was because people were like, I don't feel connected to my work. During the pandemic, my company communicated to me that I'm replaceable or they don't really care. And what we need to do in the future of work is bring more shared humanity, compassion, and empathy in the workplace. And where does that come from? Coming from a playful space.
Playful space. And my good friend Zach Mercurio, we spoke in our series 1 about the importance of mattering. And I think play just sounds like it gives that beautiful space to open up and to share more of ourselves in a more authentic way. And I hear that there is a real business case from what you're saying, is that it can help to actually retain our people when they have that sense that they matter and that they're giving that freedom to be themselves, to contribute, and to do things a little bit differently. That's a real business case for play. But I have to say, in reading through some of your work, I noticed almost like a fundamental philosophy, and I'm going to put words in your mouth, that this play business is connected to a sense of purpose for you. And I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about the background of what got you so fascinated and so obsessed, if you like, about play and its power.
Yes, yes. So, okay, so I'll tell you my Batman origin story in a moment.
Oh, I
But
love
first,
that.
for the reason why, I'll give you a few examples of why play is so important in the workplace, right? You know,
Please.
Google, when they first started, had this 20% rule where they gave their staff a fifth of their time to pursue whatever was curious and what was ever interesting to them, as long as it helped out Google. What came from Google's 20% program, where they literally allowed a playground for their staff to play? Google Meet, Google Plus, Google, Google Earth, all of Gmail, AdSense, all of the foundational things that basically pay for Google to be who it is now came from allowing their staff to play. Another example of play, you know, from an innovation standpoint, if you think of any company when they first began, they were playing. They were like, could I solve this problem? Can we sell books online? Like, just the idea of it. And think about it, you know, I don't advocate for Jeff Bezos at all now, but early on, when he first started Amazon, the reason why so many people wanted to work with him is because he was doing the most innovative work. And
And it was exciting.
you know, play mentor of mine, Kevin Carroll, would say, you know, the future is where people are having the most fun, right? So because so much innovative work was happening there, people were rushing to work with him. So talk about retention is like they're tackling really fascinating problems. And then finally, the third one that I will say, like, you know, the Wright brothers, a lot of people forget, especially in the US, that the Wright brothers, at the same time they were making an airplane, these two bike mechanics, they were competing against a bunch of scientists from the Smithsonian that were being backed by government dollars. Like, so it was like one corporation and scientists versus two bike mechanics. Who got there first? The bike mechanics, because they were playing around. So this, again, we have to be thinking about what motivates people to actually want to come back to the workplace. It's doing the work that makes me come alive. It's doing the zone of genius work, my flow work. So I'm always asking leaders, do you know what your staff's zone of genius work is? What is their flow work? And if you don't know, ask them today to find out, because that's how you're going to motivate them to want to actually stay and do that work, because they love doing that work anyway. It's who they are. You're giving them the opportunity to be who they are.
Oh, there's a permission piece in that, isn't there? And
Yeah.
I can't help but think, you asked, you know, what's it like in Australia? And those examples you've given are just brilliant. But I can't help but think about the parallels of what we've seen in workplaces and that real need to kind of let go and just have permission to say, okay, well, what have I got? And what have you got? What are your strengths? What are my strengths? What happens when we mesh them together and just have some fun? And what are the parallels between the workplaces and where we're finding ourselves in our current education system? You know, we've moved through this, or we're moving through this significant pandemic and, you know, hectic amounts of disruption, of change, and our kids aren't stupid. They know how to play at their fundamental core. Well, at least, you know, to a particular age, and you can, you know, sadly see some of that play strip away. But I'm just wondering, you know, how are you seeing, if at all, the conversation around education and parallels between workplaces and those who are pivoting and those who are reimagining versus maybe those who are getting a little bit stuck in the older ways?
Yeah, so it's interesting you say that, because NASA did a study not too long ago. I think it was like just 4 or 5 years ago. They studied the creativity of kids at age 3 and their ability to just come up with ideas, right? And they found them that they were on a genius level around like 96%. And then as they studied them at age 6, when they started going to schooling, it went down to 70. And they kept going all the way to like 13. At 13, I think it was around 50%. By 18, it was down to like 20%. And by adulthood, after they had went through college, it was down in like below 10%. And they were like, and NASA's like, we need creative people.
Yeah, right.
Solve problems that we've never solved before. What is happening in the education system that is teaching us such a rote way of working, instead of helping kids navigate uncertainty. That's all of what the pandemic is. The reason why so many people were freaking out during the pandemic is they're like, what do I do? What's the rule book on the pandemic? It's like, none of this has been here before. Like, this is why play is what got us through the pandemic. If you think of what you watched, those are people playing. If you think about what you did, like puzzles or going outside or hanging out, like play got us through this pandemic. And the more we can actually, as my friend Lauren Yee would say, adult like a kid and grab onto that kid-like curiosity, that's how we're going to solve the big problems that are coming up very soon, like climate change. How do you get staff back in the workplace? How do you heal divisions politically between parties, right? How do you do all these things? We can find these out if we allow ourselves enough time to play. And I know I haven't gotten to the Batman origin story, so just let me know when you want me to get to that.
I totally want to get you to that. And I'm so glad you brought up this idea of the wicked challenges of the world. I really hope, though, that our teachers and our parents heard that it was adult like a child. Is that what I heard you say?
Adulting like a kid, yeah, from Lauren Yee.
Adulting like a kid. I love that. That needs to be spread everywhere.
And adulting like a kid, and I'll try to paraphrase how her interpretation of it is, it's not childish, but it's childlike, right?
Yes.
It's curious. It's
Yes.
fascinating.
Yes.
It's seeing the world with awe and an appreciation. You know, like you see that with like a 3-4-year-old when they're like, oh my gosh, grass, oh, snow, oh, what's this? You know, and we forget about that. And I don't know if you've like ever watched Ted Lasso, but he talks a ton about curiosity. A lot of bullies and a lot of toxic people, the biggest issue with them, they're not curious. They're not willing to question what's out there or question themselves. And really, we have to be questioning ourselves right now. Like, what are we doing regarding work? Why are so many people quitting? It's because it's not human-centric. So how do we want to look at this differently? Do we still want to measure by GDP, by like how much more profit can we make? Or should there be other metrics that we should be looking at? Like, what if the metric was retention? What if the metric was, you know, higher rates of, you know, quality of life, the ability to like spend more time with my family, you know, addressing mental health challenges. Imagine if those were metrics on top of what are your quarterly profits. But as long as we just focus on the quarterly profits, of course we're going to be disconnected to who we are.
And I think the wild thing that the research is just confirming time and time again is that actually you can't separate any one of those things. They are so intrinsically linked. One informs the other. I could go on for days. Before I do, Batman story, please share with us, where has this purpose unearthed and where is it heading? I think purpose just never ends. It's always evolving. Share a little bit about yours.
I saw the movie Big with Tom Hanks back in the day. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's this movie where he wishes that he was an adult and he gets to play with toys for a living. Like, that's his job. And when I saw that, I was just like, oh my gosh, is that a job? And I saw that in third grade. So I started writing toy companies in third grade. And I wrote them fourth grade, fifth grade, all throughout high school. You know, most of them getting rejection letters back because I think they thought I was an adult. They didn't know what to do. Like, now they would be like, oh, let's post this on Twitter. Oh, let's bring them. But back then they were like, this kid's weird, you know. And then I eventually got into college, you know, and then I got into the toy industry. And I don't know if you've ever gotten exactly what you've always wanted and then been so disappointed when you get there. But there was like no fun, no toys, no high fives, you know, just like none of the things that I saw in the movie were there, right? So I have my quarter life crisis. I'm living in New York. I moved to the San Francisco Bay Area. I don't know what to do with my life. I go on Craigslist, which is a super shady site, to find my next job. And I find this job teaching kids engineering with Lego. Basically, they were just playing for a living. And I was like, oh my gosh, it was only 7 people. But it was so much fun because I got to play. And then me and a bunch of other nerds built this into one of the largest Lego-inspired STEM organizations in the country. But we did it all by playing. Like, we were teaching 100,000 kids a year. I think we taught 1 million kids within like a decade. And we had no business plan. We had no idea what we were doing. We picked cities we thought were fun. We picked people we thought were fun. We just were playing, messing up miserably, failing all the time, but just kept going. And it became so big that we, at one point, started partnering with Lego. Like, we were just doing all these really cool things.
Wow.
And then we got the attention of the companies you mentioned, Facebook, Google, Southwest, Adobe, Amazon, and they were like, hey, do you do team building events? Hey, do you do special events? And we're like, of course we do. No, we didn't, but we just said yes to everything.
Yes to everything.
That's the play way, right? Like, we'll figure it out. I don't know if we can do that, but we'll figure it out, right? But then what I found working with a lot of these organizations, even though they were at the top of their game, I noticed that their staff was not fully allowed to play, right? Like some of their teams didn't have the most psychologically safe workspace to tackle really important issues. So I created Rediscover Your Play to navigate difficult conversations, to address that inner critic, to deal with that toxic person at work, right? I was running that workshop with Gary Ware at Australia's Pause Fest, where we saw people crying and laughing, and the workshop was called Dealing with A-Holes at Work Through Play, because a lot of people were dealing with toxic people. And the crying or the sadness happened because so many people in the room were like, I left a job that I loved because of this toxic person. Oh my goodness, I left a job that I loved. And then so many people are like, I thought I was alone in this. I didn't realize how pervasive this issue is. So I wanted to use play as a way to tackle really important issues, as I see play as a huge tool to heal the world and heal a lot of divisions both outside and within ourselves, you know, that is so powerful.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. There are so many parts. I firstly want to draw our listeners' attention to psychological safety. And if that's a new term to you, I really want to invite you to go back and revisit Series 1 and my conversation with Karen Stain, who does a brilliant job of unpacking what psychological safety is all about and why it is so important. And I love the prioritizing play as a business model. I love that. And I'm going to be honest, I'm a little bit biased. Those of you who will have followed the Posify journey, we 100% prioritize play, and that play is led by our purpose. And there's so much of what I'm hearing you say, Jeff, that, you know, that's what we're instilling in our kids to keep it alive within them, because they just get it at a granular level. They understand that work is not about just profit. It's about creating value for the planet and its people too. So I just love that your Batman story is just so interconnected and woven into that, and that you had the courage to spot along the way and call out BS as you were heading along, despite the fact that you kind of hit that success, if you like, in the traditional term of, I've got my goal, but hang on a second, is this where I actually imagined I wanted to be? That's a real strength.
And actually, that's also a really important point to talk about. Like, you know, right now, I think a lot of people think happiness is over there. Right? Yeah. Like, if I do one thing, if I make enough money, then I'll be happy. If I get married, I'll be happy. If I have this X amount of kids, if I get this house, you know, and that's where so much of the suffering comes from, right? Expectations is the thief of joy. And you look at, like, heck, you know, Michael Phelps, and, you know, you have a lot of really amazing swimmers as well. But this guy won more gold medals than anyone in history, and then went into depression. Yeah. Because it was like lack of purpose, but also not rooted in falling in love with the process, but so fixated on the results. And we have to be careful about getting so fixated on the results. Many times, by being in the present, being in the process, falling in love with the process, falling in love with the play, you actually can build your best work. And I think we have gotten way too focused on, like, I got to hit these fourth quarter results. Well, what do you have to do in order to do that? And does it fit your integrity, right? I saw this recently, and I posted this on my Instagram. If you're over 45 and don't have an under 30 mentor, not mentee, mentor, then you're going to miss fundamental shifts in thinking that are happening, right? Like, our mentors are our kids, our mentors are Gen Z, and I think a lot of times it's just like, they don't know what they're talking about. yo, who is pushing crypto? Who's pushing NFTs? Who's pushing TikTok? Who's pushing all these things that frankly a lot of times are like, oh, that's really scary. We should at least know what they are, right? We should at least know, because they're building the future. And we have to understand also that 20 years ago, Google wasn't even a thing, right? Like Facebook wasn't anything. Like, and these are now like the largest organizations that are driving. Amazon was just started 2 years before that. So we have to understand, like, we have to be humble enough to learn from mentors that sometimes are younger than us, right? At the same time to also recognize people that are mentors that are older than us as well, because I also feel we don't respect the elderly enough as well.
Absolutely. It's that intergenerational exchange of wisdom, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
And as you were speaking, it was like a light bulb. I think the bit that I'm noticing is getting missed is remembering that this younger generation, for them, they don't have the history that we've got. I mean, I sit just on that bridge where I'm still classified technically, proudly as a millennial, but we haven't got that experience of growing up with a brain that's still developing amidst all of this change and chaos. You know, my life was very predictable. There are aspects that weren't, but, you know, I didn't have this idea of threat or change or challenge and constant streams. That's normal for our kids. And I think one of the greatest joys for us as a family growing through the pandemic and having time with online learning and time with the kids at school was watching them gravitate to the things that they were fascinated by, picking up their own interests and curiosities. I mean, my son, he's 13 and God love him. He's, you know, into the gaming and the streaming and all that jazz. And he's also neurodiverse. And he was finding on these platforms that they weren't always safe, that there was a lot of bullying happening. There was a lot of kids getting outed. And so what did he do? He jumped on YouTube and taught himself how to create the bots so he could set up a safe Discord server, and ended up blowing this community up with this safe space for neurodiverse kids to come and show their stuff. Like, the kid's 13. I'm like, you've got a lot to teach me, kid. I mean, we're missing the mark if we're not learning from our kids. So I could go on for days.
Hey there, I wanted to tell you about an exciting and innovative solution we've been designing to help solve this problem of how we best prepare the next gen for an ever-evolving world and future workforce that's going to demand a whole new set of skills and mindsets in order for them to thrive. The Posify Academy is Australia's first student-led, evidence-based and curriculum-aligned wellbeing and career development platform, helping young people aged 10 to 14 uncover and deliver their unique potential. It's the first of a trilogy series that's helping young people move seamlessly and with confidence from education and into industry as they design a life and a career of impact. Teaching skills like communication, compassion, creativity, critical thinking, agility, curiosity, resilience, problem solving, all those human capability skills that we talk about here on this podcast, and connecting them with a sense of purpose. To learn more, you can visit theposifygroup.com.au/posify-academy. Now, back to the show.
The other thing that I think is really important, that I feel is one of the greatest gifts that parents can give their kids, is to take risks and fail in front of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And not be perfect. Like,
Tell me more about that.
I think of my friend Marina, who just picked up roller skating like in her 40s, you know, and like, you know, she's like doing it, right? And she's like going down bowls, and I think she like hurt herself recently, and a bunch of her friends are like, oh, I told you not to do something that's so dangerous. But her kids see her as a hero because she's willing to pick up stuff that she is just starting off to do. And right, talk about adulting like a kid, talk about being curious and willing to take on, because then a lot of times our kids are not looking at our words. They're not listening to our words. They're looking at our actions. And if we are putting ourselves out there and willing to be like, hey, I don't know everything, and I'm failing, but I'm trying, that gives them the bravery to also be like, I guess I could do that too. I guess I can be myself, and it's okay to be myself.
That's beautiful. Can we riff on that for a minute? What does that look like in your imagination? And I'm taking you totally off script, and thank you for going there with me. So we've talked about that in terms of parenting, and you know your kid really well, mostly, and where you can kind of go and play with that and model it as we go. What does does that look like in your mind, or where could it go if we were to just, get rid of boundaries? Once you put a group of kids in a learning environment, say a traditional classroom, how might teachers or our, leaders in education who have got a group of kids that they're working with, or even your group of 8 that you're working with the STEM design, model that play-based inquiry and that willingness to do something new?
Yeah, when I was running the Lego thing, I'd run this with certain groups that were ready for this, but I'd be like, today we're taking on an impossible challenge. And I mean impossible being like, I haven't figured it out. So we're all in this together trying to figure this out. And guess what? We're going to fail all day. All day we're going to fail. That we're going to embrace the failure. We're going to celebrate each time we fail, because that's like one step closer to us getting there. And I would even use the IDEO motto of like fail faster, succeed sooner, right? And it's just like, and then you treat them like colleagues. Like we're figuring this out together. And I think some of the best teachers do that when they're in classroom. Both my sisters are teachers, and they're like, hey, we're all figuring out this pandemic together. We're all trying to do this together. So I have your back, you have mine. I will let you know when I'm having a tough day. You let me know when you are, and we can be more transparent. And when you see that, then it feels more, it's not hierarchical, right?
Yes.
You're getting rid of those boundaries and just being like, we're all on this rock spinning on space, and we're just trying to figure this out. And I think the more we're willing to admit, like, I don't know what I'm doing. None of us know what we're doing. I wish more influencers would just be like, I'm just making this up as I go along because I have no idea. Because they are. And instead we're pretending that we know, right? Totally. And then the pandemic revealed that all these thought leaders, all these gurus, they had no idea what they were doing either. They're just making it up. So like, let's stop pretending like we're all experts. Let's talk about what we do know, but then admit when we don't know. And I'm about to make a video about that. I think those are 3 important words to say. I don't know. And it's okay, right? It's okay not to know. But this is part of the curiosity. Once you identify that you don't know, then you can actually start to build something. And I think right now, too many people are pretending like they know stuff that they just don't.
Yeah, I want to add something to that sentence. I don't know, and I'm ready to figure it out by your side. Yeah?
Right.
No, I'm ready to figure out for you, but let's do this together kind of attitude. I'd love to see our listeners, wherever you are, embracing that beautiful thought that Jeff has offered us. And also, as you were speaking, a few other things came to mind. I'm sure many of our listeners will be familiar with the idea of a growth mindset. So go and revisit Dweck's work there. And the other thing that came to mind was one of the lessons that we do with our kids, which is talking about, and you'll know this one, Jeff, from IDEO as well, switching from a problem-centric to a solution-oriented mindset and looking at how can we reframe our questions. So I'm going to drop a link in the show notes for our listeners to go and check out some different activities that if you are in a classroom setting, you can really start to explore that gift of generous curiosity that Jeff is really drawing our attention to. So, so many gems. There is one in particular.
And then also
yes.
Oh, can I just add to that just for a moment?
Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the things that you said that's really important about I don't know, but let's figure this out together is the idea that you're in the trenches with them.
Yeah.
Like you're doing it right alongside them. And whether you're doing that as a leader in your workplace and you're like, hey, we're going to figure this out together, or you're a teacher with your child or a parent with your child, that's the part that's really powerful, right? And what a parent can do sometimes too, I tell them this a lot, is like have your kid teach you what they're doing. Like where you are now, they are going to teach you your world. Show me your world. Okay, I'm going to sit and learn what video game you play. I'm going to sit and teach me, right? And then later on, you as a parent can be like, here, let me show you my world. This is my play world. Those are fascinating conversations, again, where the two individuals, again, there's not a hierarchy, and you're learning from each other.
There's that real spirit of sharing. And I think for me, the key difference, and thank you for pointing that out, that's just so important, is that there's that authenticity involved. So it's not a case of, well, I don't know sport, I actually do know, but let's figure this out together. Kids can see straight through this. It's a genuine, I have no idea, like, where are we going to start?
Yes.
And figuring it out together.
Yes.
It's the authenticity piece. Is that what you meant?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. One of the pieces that I heard you speak to and followed up with you quite quickly afterwards, and I'm digressing completely, although I think we'll circle round, is your thoughts on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And look, I could jump in, but I'm not going to. I really just want our listeners to hear from you because you've been diving into this, and I was curious
Yeah.
because I have also. So please give us our readers who may not have caught up with the conversation. Where are we at with the idea of Maslow's hierarchy of
Well,
needs?
I've been exploring many different terms that I found out later to not be actually true, right? Or they're misinterpreted or they're incomplete. Before I get to hierarchy of needs, like there's the term carpe diem, right? And carpe diem is
Yes,
supposed to mean
seize the
seize the
day.
day.
Yeah.
It's not. It doesn't actually
Really?
mean seize the day.
What does it
No.
mean?
It actually means the translation is to pluck the day. And it's this idea of like smelling the roses. It's this idea of like appreciating what's around you. We added this like
Wow.
jingoistic, toxic masculine, seize the day, conquer the day, tackle the day, but it's not
Wow.
that. It's actually just appreciate the day, enjoy the day. Like, you don't have to conquer it, right?
Wow.
You have to be
Savor
present in
it.
it. And we've
Yes.
missed that, right? So
Totally
we
missed
have to be
that.
re-looking, right? Be curious about that. So
Yeah.
tying into the Maslow hierarchy of needs, for many people, they know it as like Abraham Maslow. At the bottom is physiological needs, and then it goes all the way up to self-actualization. But a lot of people don't know that Abraham Maslow spent a great deal of time with the First Nations tribe up in Canada. I believe it was the Blackfoot tribe, and he got the Maslow hierarchy of needs from them, and he
Yeah.
actually misinterpreted it, or another way of seeing it is it's incomplete because Blackfoot nations, the First Nations perspective, it's not a triangle, it's a teepee. And at the bottom of Blackfoot Nation's hierarchy of needs is self-actualization. That's the bottom. Not the top, that's the bottom. The idea of like, how do I show up in the world? How do I want to contribute to the world? Who am I in this world and how do I show up? So that's at the very bottom. The middle is community actualization, which is super
Yes.
fascinating. And it's this idea that like, how do we show up as a community? How do we get each other's back? How do we look out for one another? Like, say for example, someone goes into depression, instead of being like, oh, give him a therapist and give him medicines and then he's good, it's like, what can the village do? Oh, let's find out why this person is in depression in the first place. Oh, because they used to be a farmer and they don't have the equipment. The village now fundraises to get them the equipment. Oh, someone needs to watch that person's kids. Someone finds out the community has their back, right? And you
Yes.
see this in blue zones with centenarians, people that live above the age of
Yeah.
100. These communities where they're watching out for each other. It's like, because the community is showing up together and being like, how do we want to be? How do we want to
Yes.
impact this world at the small amount of time that we're here, right? And at the very top, which I just love, is cultural perpetuity, which is breath of life. And what does that mean? That means by yourself, and this is why there's so many people that have a quarter life or midlife crisis, by yourself and your life insignificant. It just is in the greater scheme of things. But also, you are so significant because you are the link between your ancestors and your descendants, right? You are the
Oh,
link.
can you say that again? That is powerful.
Yeah, you are the link between your ancestors and your descendants. So breath of life is your ancestors have breathed life into you, all of their successes, all their failures, all their historical traumas, everything that they've learned over time is in you, and you get to decide what you pass on. You get to break historical trauma cycles, right? You get to learn like everything that they had to go through so that you could be where you're at today, right? And when you actually look at how much your ancestors have done and find out like, oh my goodness, I didn't even know my great grandfather or great grandmother did that. I love doing that. And then you're like, and then you're willing to pass it on to the next generation. You realize that it's much bigger than you. A lot of Native American tribes, when they make decisions, they think, what would our ancestors 1,000 years ago would do, and what would our descendants want 1,000 years later? Like, they're thinking in such long terms. And when you see it or impact like that, you realize it's much bigger than you. And you start to show up in that way, and you have a certain level of humility to how powerful and unique your life is and what you could do, right? So that's how it could be if you allow yourself to be curious, or you could just binge watch Netflix. But and not like one, you can't do one or the other, but it's just like there's so much that we can have an impact in the short time that we have. So what do you want to do with that time?
Yeah, what do you want to do with that time? That's amazing. So many thought bubbles going off. Yesterday, to give context of our timeline, was a date that traditionally in Australia is called Australia Day. And you would have heard
Anzac
about it.
Day?
Different to Anzac Day, so Australia
different.
Day on the 26th, I guess up until recently, where there's a bit of a shift to what we say wanting to change the date, traditionally was set aside by white people to celebrate what it meant to be Australian, until there was some information brought about and people started reading and questioning and saying, hang on a second, what about our First Nations people, our Aboriginal people, our Indigenous people, our Torres Strait Islanders? Actually, the 26th of January, the only reason that day was selected was because it was the day that white man came and invaded in New South Wales and took over the land. And there was massacre of our Aboriginal, our First Nations people. So it represents to many of us, I guess, a symbol of trauma and of a stripping away, of not validating an entire community of people who hold such collective wisdom. And hearing you speak about the influence of the Blackfoot tribe and what that's meant, the interpretation. And by the way, if anyone wants to read any more about what we're talking about with Maslow's work, I'm going to put a link to Transcend by Scott Barry Kaufman, because that's where I first came across this discrepancy. It's a great read. I really recommend it. But it got me thinking when I was hearing you speak about it. It's like, wow, what is this whitewashing of stories that we've got? And not just that, seeing things through a particular lens. And I wanted to ask you, if I could, how do you see the power of play moving forward in our learning, in particular with our next gen, to ensure that actually through the power of story and sharing and through play, that we get to rewrite what happens and whose stories are involved moving forward in our learning? Deep question.
Wait, what?
Deep question. I've thrown you right in the deep end there.
I think the way play will play a role is how willing are we to be curious to find out all of the various layers that make this complex. A lot of times we avoid complexity, and we talk a lot about this in positive psychology, right? That people want to feel, I want to feel joy. Well, if you want to feel joy, you also have to feel sadness. No, I don't want to feel that. I just want to feel joy. Well, it's just like, there's something magical about beautiful sadness, right? There's something, when my dad died, all of his brothers showed up. It was the first time they had seen each other since their mom died, like I think 20 years before then. So I was feeling both sadness and grief. But then I was also feeling joy and gratitude that they were there. And I was like, I can't handle both these feelings. Oh, wait a minute. This is what living is, right? Yeah. And I think us taking on a play-oriented, growth-oriented mindset to history and re-looking at it and being like, hey, we used to celebrate Thanksgiving. Now in the U.S., that's a controversial thing where we'll celebrate something or we'll hang it, but we won't celebrate Christopher Columbus coming to America because he didn't even find America. He bumped into the Caribbean and thought it was India. Why are we celebrating this idiot? That was super cocky, and it was just like, hey, look what I found. So I think we have to do that with all of our history and really be questioning and constantly revising, right? And I think whenever we battle this is happening a lot in the U.S. with like, oh, well, why are we changing our history? Oh, you're just saying you hate America. No, we're just recognizing the various complex layers of this, right?
That's beautiful.
And if we're not going to be able to address these complex layers, we can't have hard conversations.
That's right.
Because we're not establishing that we are on the same foundation. And I think tying that back to work is like really understanding what is the story of that employee and what is that story of that manager or that leader. Right now, there's such a disconnect between them, and their experiences are not being shared with one another. The more that we're willing to accept, complexity, the more we can have that hard conversation.
So much so. And, as you're speaking, it's drawing my attention back to the work of Lina, who those in the clinical psychology space will be familiar, with her work with DBT. But rather than looking at things as so dichotomous, this or that, you spoke about being unpatriotic. It's like, how did we get to that? Just from applying critical thinking, really, and curiosity. And so what happens if we start to get more dialectical and apply a beginner's mind and recognize that it can be this and that? We can be patriotic and really question where some of these dates are from. Oh my goodness, Jeff, I could go on for days. I'm conscious of your time. You're so generous.
Or I'll just add this one other thing. Imagine if most conversations had, when we were about to have a debate, be like, okay, before we begin, let's define these terms so that we're on the same page. Simply, if we simply did that, we could have better conversations right now.
That's
Right now, we're just so many people are not even having conversations. They're just talking and doing speeches past each other. And if we really want to heal division and heal each other, then we really have to start listening, actively listening. And that means like understanding that I don't have all the answers and I need to be more humble.
Yeah, I love that. To me, that gave a really practical way that we could all start to remove some layers of assumptions. It's just ask the other person, what is our definition individually and where does that come from? What's the filter or the layer that we're entering that? And then how can we more playfully agree on a shared definition, or at least acknowledge that we have a difference of opinion and then get curious and ask questions? And one of our favorite brainstorming games, I'll put another link to the show notes, is the yes and. So instead of yes, but, let me take you back to my perspective because I'm so insistent on sharing, because if I don't share mine, I might lose something. Yes, and. It's an appreciation that we're coming from different learning points. So I hope that's useful to our listeners. Before I let you go.
Oh, and I would challenge them also to do this. Also pay attention to when you're actually listening and when you're just waiting for them to stop so you can start talking. Because a lot of times people are just waiting. They're just like, are you done yet? Okay, now I'm going to say my thing. And it doesn't even respond to what that person was saying. This is why so many meetings are so bad. Because it's just people doing many TED Talks over and over again. And you're just sitting there like, when is this meeting going to be over? Because like, this is just a waste of my time. We're not actually hearing one another.
It's so funny you say that. One of your favorite TikToks, and I'm going to encourage everybody to go check out your social handles. They are going to be loud and proud on our episode page because I love the one that you did about the me show. It was brilliant.
Oh, I love
just
that one.
Brilliant. Be wary of the me monster. And I have to confess, as a woman, a neurodiverse woman with ADD, it is within my biological, neurological makeup to have that sense of impulsivity. That if I could, it would all come out. So I really have to work hard. I've had to practice the skill of active listening. And to people who didn't know about my ADHD, they just never would have imagined that that was a skill that I really had to work hard at. But it's a skill. And I think it's a really important one, to your point, that we all embrace and pass on with our kids.
But the difference between you and the me monster is you're curious about other people. The me monster just wants to talk
I'm glad we clarified.
About themselves. Everything that they're saying is just them basically saying, I'm important. Hey, by the way, did you remember I'm important? Hey, now I'm going to tell you another thing, I'm important. Hey, I was just in Switzerland. Hey, I have a Tesla. Hey, I just got promoted at work. Like, all of those sentences are like, pay attention to me. I'm feeling very insecure. Did I already mention to you how important I am? because if you don't know, I'm going to feel really bad about myself. That's what the meme
Yes.
monster is doing. You don't do any of that.
I'm really glad you clarified. Thank you, Jeff. I must admit that there's always that little skerrick of fear underneath. I think we could all recognize meme monsters in our lives, and whether or not you dodge them or embrace them and try and challenge them to get to that position of curiosity, maybe we could start that conversation. I have one more confession before I let you go, because it's on a topic that I think is also dear to your heart and 100% dear to the listeners. The confession is that you and I didn't actually know of each other 48 hours ago. I certainly didn't know of your work, and I'm so glad I now do. But we wouldn't be having this conversation if it wasn't for the fact that I listened to one podcast and heard your incredible joy and optimism and sense of wonder and awe come beaming through into my ears that lit up my own day, that before I even checked out who you were, I was like, who is this dude? I'm just going to clarify, he exists on LinkedIn. Yes, he does. He's an actual human, not some kind of lit up amazing thing from outer space. And wrote and said, hey, Jeff, Maz from Down Under, want to come and play on the podcast? And I have to be honest, had I taken the time to look at your incredible work, the funny TikToks that you put up, my own inner critic would have crept in and said, maybe not that one yet, Maz. Maybe you should do a few more episodes. Probably not bright enough yet. Maybe he'll catch you up on not being so smart. He's a pretty smart dude. I know I'm not the only human to struggle with this imposter syndrome. And I know that had I let it get in my way and not pressed send, I would have missed out on this opportunity, which I'm off the charts grateful for. Can you tell us a little bit about where you see imposter syndrome rocking up? And have you got any tips other than just ignore somebody's career history before you reach out like I did?
So what's so funny is you're like telling me and being like, oh, he's so amazing. I'm like, what was she talking about? I don't even know who she's talking about. Because I have my own imposter syndrome that I'm like, she's talking about this really amazing guy, but that's not me. That's like, she doesn't really know the real me. No, but like that, I think we all do that. You have those worries too? We all deflect the praise because we're like, we have a certain vision of ourselves. And I run a whole workshop on playing with your inner critic. And this is actually really important about this idea of like, you don't want to destroy your inner critic. You actually want to become friends with it. And in order to become friends with it, you really have to start to connect with it. Because if you think about what is your inner critic, it's just your younger self, like that went through trauma, that's trying to warn you like, hey, remember when you were 8 years old and you got rejected? Or hey, when you were 13 and you weren't cool? Like that's that term. So what I've done that's really helped with my inner critic is I actually identify what it sounds like, identify what it looks like. I actually create a character for it, and then I name it. And mine is Gargamel. So I like know when Gargamel's coming out. It's like, you suck, Jeff, you're the worst. No one likes you. You don't know what you're talking about. And I will literally write down what Gargamel will say to me. And when I write it down or I text my best friend Dana and I'm like, Gargamel said this to me, as soon as I write it, it gets quiet. Because I'm giving it the attention that it needs, right? And then I also then write whatever it's saying to me that's really mean, then I look at it afterwards and then I flip it. So if it's just like, no one knows what, you're never going to have an impact and be like, actually, Jeff, you do have a huge impact. You don't know what you're talking about. Actually, Jeff, the stuff that you do know, you really do know. And when I flip it and start saying that stuff to me, I'm actually empowering more of my inner child. So then I can start to hear more of my inner child and less of my inner critic. And then I just saw this, which I really loved, from Elizabeth Gilbert. I'm rereading her book, Big Magic. She actually writes a letter to fear. Whenever she's about to take on a new project, she writes a letter to fear and is like, hey, creativity and I are going on this trip over the next few months or year. I just want to let you know, fear, you're allowed to come along, but you cannot drive the car. You can sit in the back. You don't get to touch the radio. You don't get to do all these things. But this is what we're doing. And just simply, again, acknowledging fear, acknowledging your inner critic, not hating on it because it's a part of you and it's there to protect you, but also not allowing it to take over who you are. And I think a lot of times when we get in that negative spiral that we all know, right? we don't even realize what our inner critic is saying to us. So whenever you feel crappy about yourself, be like, okay, why do I feel so crappy? Just start writing down what thoughts are coming out. Because your inner critic, you have multiple inner critics. You have a whole board of you have a board of directors of inner critics, from like the superficial Gargamel all the way down to like the meanest one. But when you're actually voicing it, then the inner critic feels like it's being heard. And then you can be like, is that true? That whole Byron Katie. Like, is that true? Actually, that's not true. I'm not a loser. Actually, I know what I'm doing. Actually, I run a really amazing podcast. Actually, I really do love my TikTok videos. And then you acknowledge it, and then you're able to move it on. But do not ignore it, and do not try to kill it, crush it, or not give love to it, because that's all it's looking for. It's just looking for love, just like us.
That is such a beautiful note to end on, Jeff. Thank you so much. Oh, I'm thinking of so many resources, including a blog I found of yours on the inner critic, which I will put in the show notes. Oh, our listeners, we have all been treated today with one of the most joyous humans, I have to say, I've had the pleasure of meeting, even if only by virtually. But before we jumped online, we did agree, at least I agreed, maybe it was a me monster, that you're coming to Australia. We're going to find
back to Australia. I went to
happen.
school at University of Melbourne. My Geelong was my footy team when they weren't good. And I just was there for Australia's Posify. So I love Australia. I need to come back anyway.
I think we need to start a movement. #bring back Jeff.
Let's go.
If you see it pop up on social, you'll know the perpetrator. Oh, thank you, Jeff. And in the meantime, where can our listeners find you? Because I know they're going to want more of your goodness in their ears.
Yes.
And on their
so
screens.
if you want to see my ridiculous videos,
yes, please.
My handle is at Jeff Harry Plays, JeffHarryPlays, and I'm at that same handle on TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, and Medium. And then if you want to work with me, if you want to solve some problems using play and positive psychology, or work with your teams to actually bring some psychological safety through play, then go to rediscoveryourplay.com, click on the Let's Play button, and let's connect and have a conversation how you can kick more butt and just enjoy more of your life by playing and truly embracing who you are through play.
Oh, the best. I know so many people are going to be taking you up on that offer. I, for sure, am heading off from this podcast to figure out how we do it next. Thank you so much, Jeff. And to our listeners, you have been listening to another episode of Classroom 5.0, where we're all reimagining the future of learning together. Thank you for listening. Until next time, we will see you later, alligators.
Classroom 5.0 is brought to you by the Posify Group, a socially conscious education company arming the next gen with a sense of purpose and the future skills they'll need to thrive in this ever-evolving world. Your ratings and reviews really mean the world to us, so if you loved this episode, do let us know and share it with a friend. We'd like to say thanks to our editing guru, Clint Rance, and his team at My Video Producer, who helped us put this show together. And for today's show notes, links, and more episodes just like these, you can visit theposifygroup.com.au/podcast. Thanks for helping us imagine alive the future of learning. See you next time.